Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Story Corner Adventures. Today we are going to be reading the last chapter of The Wheel on the Spool by Meindert Dejong. This will be our second last video because the last chapter is very long and we'll need to do it in 2 lots, I think. For those of you who have stayed with me right from the beginning of the story, thank you very much. I hope you really enjoyed it and I hope that you recommend the video to others. So, we have left the village of Shora still without a stork, although they do have a wheel on the school and another wheel shortly to be put up on Janos's roof. But as of yet, no storks, except that we do know of a pair of living storks. The only ones who know about it, though, or at least who did as of the end of chapter 14, were 2 little toddlers, Linda and Jan. Let's find out if their message can ever get out. Here we go. Chapter 15, Storks in the Sea. It turned out to be little Jan, who remembered to tell about the 2 storks that had flown down into the sea. His mother had carried him down into the house, and now things were quieting down. Jan stood at the window to watch the big boys and Lena troop off to school to finish the interrupted morning session. The nice, quiet-spoken teacher who had carried him down all the ladders had told the big boys and Lena to get right back to school. But Yella hadn't followed the teacher. He had run back to the dike. Jan knew what for, to get the storks. But Linda had said they were the wrong storks. Yella had run off, but Auke had gone to the kitchen to fix himself a slice of bread with syrup. Auke came hurrying through the house to run after the others. He was biting his syrup bread. There came Yella too, far down the street with the 2 big storks. "Look, Auke!" Jan called after his brother. "He's got storks!" "Storks?" Auke said. He stopped in his tracks. "What are you talking about?" "Yella's got storks, but he hasn't got the right storks because the 2 live ones flew down in the sea. They stood in the sea." Auke wasn't even listening. He'd rushed to the window. He'd pulled the curtains aside. "Dead," Auke said in a queer voice, but he was talking to himself. "Drowned in the storm." "Shall I show you where the other 2 storks are, Auke?" Jan said helpfully. He eyed Auke's slice of bread. Auke wasn't even eating it. "What in the world are you talking about?" Auke said impatiently. "Storks in the sea." "Honest, Auke?" Auke looked hard at him. "You're not just making this up?" he asked. "Oh no, Auke," Jan said earnestly. Yella was passing the house with the storks. Auke started to run out of the house after him. Then Auke turned to his younger brother. "Does Linda know?" he asked. "Oh, sure." Linda, being a little girl, knew 10 times more words than Jan. Linda could explain herself. "I'll go ask Linda," Auke said. "May I have your bread, Auke? You're not eating it." "Here," Auke handed it to his brother and hurried next door to question Linda. "Oh, I forgot," Linda said in amazement. To think she'd forgotten. "I told Lena when I was in the tower, but she didn't hear me, and then I forgot. But 2 storks flew and flew, and then they flew down in the sea. I saw them, and I showed Jan. You can see them from the tower, Auke." Auke rushed out of the house. Yella was far down the street. "Yella! Yella, come here! Come along with me. The kids saw storks fly down in the sea." "Sure, I've got them," Yella hollered back. "Live storks! They saw them fly! Hurry!" Yella came sprinting. Halfway back to Auke, he took time to lay the storks down beside the steps of a stoop, and then he came on again. They saw 2 storks come flying towards Shora, the way I make it out, and land in the sea, Auke explained urgently. "Maybe they landed somewhere on a sandbar. I don't know, but they say 2 storks were standing in the sea. Come on." The 2 boys raced to the dike. They searched the sea, but the dike wasn't high enough. They were just looking against the crests of leaping waves. In the distance, where they knew the sandbar lay, they could see nothing but dark water. Yella saw the dinghy, which had been left behind by the fishing fleet. It rode restlessly at its short anchor rope below the dike. "Let's take the dinghy and row out there." "In that kind of sea? Gosh, Yella, we can't just go out on the say-so of two kids." Auke looked at the tower. They were both so sure. Wonder if the teacher locked the tower door in all the excitement. He was carrying Jan. "You can see he locked the gate to the churchyard all right," Yella said. "Yes, but you're tall. You could boost me up over the churchyard fence. If I could get up in the tower..." They raced down the dike to try the plan. Auke kicked his wooden shoes off, and Yella boosted him as high as he could up the woven wire fence. Auke could just barely grab the top of the fence. He clung there a moment. Then, with Yella giving a savage shove at his heels, he swung his legs high and managed to vault over the top. He barely cleared it. There was a ripping sound as he caught in the fence for a second. He fell down hard inside the churchyard. "Made it!" he gasped. After giving his torn trousers a hasty glance, Auke picked himself up and dashed to the tower. The door was unlocked. "Wait there for me!" Auke yelled and disappeared inside. Yella stood staring up at the tower until his neck ached. At last, Auke's excited voice came from high in the tower. "Yella! Yella, they're there! They're there! I saw them plain! One was flapping and struggling. Maybe they're sucked in the sand. Run and tell them at school. Tell Janus too. And get the dinghy ready. Tell the teacher to open the gate for me and..." Yella wasn't listening to all the instructions. Yella was running hard. Up in the bell loft, Auke hurried to the ladder to go down. But then he had to look at the storks just once more. He stared hard at the roiling sea, and then he found the storks again. They were far out at sea, out toward the islands. Far behind them, the lighthouse at the end of one island rose dimly white and round like a chalky crayon. The waves leaped gray and spooky under the dark sky. Only now and then, when the waves were leveled out before the sandbar, did the storks emerge from the grayness, like two white blots. Then one stork began flapping its wings. The motion of its huge wings made it suddenly stand out clear. Amazingly, it rose and flew heavily above the sandbar, but its mate did not rise after it. The big stork flapped down again beside the other one. They stood side by side, lonely in the gray of the endless, restless sea. Auke ran to the tower opening that overlooked the village. He stared over the roofs at the distant school. Nothing stirred there. They had to hurry. Ah, there was Janus now. There he came in the wheelchair down the empty street. A coil of rope was draped over the back of his chair. At the bottom of the dike, Janus sat helpless. The dike stopped him. Janus looked up at the sky. Now his eyes turned to the tower clock. Auke guessed what he was doing. He was making a reckoning of the time for the flood tide to come. There couldn't be much time, for now Janus whirled his chair around impatiently and looked back down the street. There they came at last, the boys and Lena, racing far out ahead of the teacher. Janus did not wait for the teacher. He had the four boys carry him and his chair up the dike steps. Lena pushed with all her strength against the back of the chair. Now the teacher was up there too. He grabbed the chair with Lena. Up Janus went. Once on top of the dike, he rolled himself headlong down the slope of the dike toward the sea. Oh, Janus knew. He was wasting no time. Good old Janus, Auke said in his utter relief. They were forgetting him. Auke started to yell at the group below the dike, but suddenly he reconsidered. It was far more important that they got the dinghy out. Now Janus had Yella wade into the sea to bring the dinghy to the foot of the dike. Much water was standing against the dike even in the last hour of ebb tide. Big Yella wrestled the boat to the dike. Hey! They were lifting Janos into the boat. Janos himself was going out. That's why Janos had brought the rope. The teacher lashed Janos to the seat. Janos had thought of it. Nobody else would have. As he had no balance, Janos had to be tied down. Otherwise, when he pulled on the oars, he'd go flat on his back into the bottom of the boat. Now Yella and the teacher got into the seat ahead of Janos' seat. Auke could see Janos handing the teacher a glove. Janos had even thought of that. But that was right too. The teacher's hands were soft. Without gloves, they'd blister and be useless long before the hard pull to the sandbar was over. Amazingly, Lena was going along too. She was stepping into the back of the boat. And Pier. Pier clambered into the front. But Ilke and Dirk were staying behind. Why Pier and Lena? Oh, they were the smallest, the lightest. That must be it. Yes, that would be it. Pier and Lena were going along to hold the wild storks while the others rowed. Oh, Janos had thought of everything. Good old Janos. Now, Ilke and Dirk were shoving the boat clear of the dike. Janos was flailing his oars mightily. Now the two in front were catching the rhythm of the oar stroke. The boat crept ahead and moved steadily away from the dike. It would be a long, hard journey. Auke hurried back to the sea side of the tower. When at last the waves let him see the storks again, the two white birds were standing like sentinels. They weren't flapping their wings anymore. They weren't struggling. Auke suddenly realized he was bone cold. He shivered and hurried back to the village side of the tower to see what Dirk and Ilke were doing. They were running along the dike toward the tower, and Dirk was waving something. They had the key to the churchyard gate. Teacher hadn't forgotten him. Auke hurried down the ladders in the tower. In the dinghy, no one talked. The two men in Yella had to strain too hard at the oars to talk. The heavy work, the wash, and the unevenness of the fall and rise of the waves made it impossible for the inexperienced teacher to dip his oars in cleanly and pull at just the right time. He was doing his best, using every fiber of his untrained muscles. You couldn't ask more of the man. Janos bent his powerful body a little harder to the task of forcing the boat ahead. Now and then, dipping in among the troughs and rising on the crest of a wave, Lena in the stern could see Pier's head rise above the rowing men. Pier was keeping his eyes firmly fixed on the tower. Always, when Pier's face bobbed up again, he was looking at the tower, never at the sea and the waves. His face was greenish, strained, but his lips were pale. Pier was fighting seasickness. Even when riding the crest of a long wave, Lena could nowhere catch sight of the storks or the sandbar. The sea was an endlessly tossing mass. The sky was dark and somber. Sometimes the tip of the lighthouse was penciled white against the sky. Then it sank into the sea again. Only Janos would know the distance to and the exact location of the sandbank, but Janos was grimly silent. Suddenly he took his eyes off the two rowers ahead of him and flashed a look back at the tower and clock. He silently rowed on for a few minutes. "Teacher," he said impatiently, "drop back. Crawl over to Lena and rest a while." Without a word, Yella slid into the center of the seat the moment the teacher moved. He grabbed the teacher's oar. Janos began grunting and counting out a new rhythm. He was setting to push the boat ahead harder. Yella fell into the rhythm at once. His powerful young back moved naturally in unison with the broad back of Janos. The four oars dipped and flashed together. "You can see he's the son of a fisherman," the exhausted teacher said to Lena. Lena nodded. Her eyes searched the sea in the hope of finding something white among the gray waves. Again, Janos glanced back at the tower. 20 minutes, he muttered. In another 20 minutes, the flood tide starts, and then we won't be going anywhere but back to the dike, and those storks will go under. Kid, if you ever rowed, row now. Can we make it in 20 minutes in this sea? The teacher asked. I'm setting a course that'll get us behind the sandbanks, Janusz said. Once they're ahead of us, they'll break the force of the waves. It won't be so roily then, and we should make it. When Lena looked back again, she had made herself wait until she had seen Pier's head rise up 12 times. The face of the clock was blurry. They were moving. If you did it that way, you could see the progress. The boat wasn't just rising and falling and dancing. Janusz and Jelle were really pulling the boat ahead. Oh, they were strong. Pier kept his eyes away from the greenish waves in the water. He still looked only at the tower. The sweat was rolling down his sick face, but he stubbornly wasn't letting the seasickness get the best of him. Here we are, Janusz said at last, although it was noticeable to no one else. Now, Jelle, 10 more good strokes and we're in the lee of the banks. Come on, boy. At the end of the 10 strokes, they all felt it, sensed it, although they could not really see it. But the great force of the waves seemed to be broken here. It was easy to tell that the boat forged ahead. Without a word to anyone, the teacher crawled back to his seat at the oar. As the teacher started to row, there was a sudden rush and swirl of water. A swelling came to the whole sea. They rose. The whole sea rose. The groundswell of the tide had come. This was the beginning of the flood tide. The tide! Pier yelled. They were the first words he had spoken. Now row! Janusz said fiercely. Row like crazy! Chop it ahead! In a matter of seconds, the high back of a sandbar rose out of the water before them. Pier twisted around and stood up. Clinging with one hand to the side of the boat, he stretched as high as he dared to look over the sandbar for the storks. Lena expected Janusz to yell at him to sit down, but instead Janusz told Pier, That's right! Stand ready! Jump and run up that bank with the anchor the moment you think you can make it. Then go for those storks. Pier turned and stared at Janusz in open-mouthed unbelief. That's right, Janusz yelled. That sand's solid. I've been on it many a time. The real tide is just rolling in past the lighthouse right now. You got time. The boat's bow shot up the bank and grounded in the sand. Pier jumped and landed hard with the heavy anchor. He held the anchor up against his chest and carried it part way up the bank where he dropped it. He looked to Janusz for further instructions and assurance. You've got 3 minutes by my reckoning. In 3 minutes, the flood tide will be rolling over this bank. Get going, Janusz said. Pier looked scared, but he turned and scrambled up the bank. For a moment, he stood on the top of the ridge. They're here! They're here! He screamed. They're alive, but they're up to their necks in water. Grab them, Janusz called hoarsely. Grab them by their necks and drag them here. They won't fight. They're done in. Quick now, kid, or you'll all 3 drown. With a last scared look at the boat, Pier disappeared. It was a tense, awful wait. The empty sand rose before them. Pier had vanished as if he'd sunk into the sea. Hidden from sight by the high ridge of sand, but thunderous in their ears, the wall of flood tide water came rolling toward them in one great roar. It's coming, Janusz said. He dug his oar into the sand and shoved the stern of the boat around so the boat would be lying broadside to the bank when Pier should come. Drag that anchor in. I'll hold the boat with the oar, he called to Jelle. Just get the anchor. Don't you go over the ridge. That kid'll be lucky if he has time to make one jump for the boat. What's keeping him? Then from behind the ridge they heard a shout. Janusz! Janusz, the tide! Janusz! Janusz, forgetting himself, strained the ropes as if to rise and run to Pier. At that moment, Pier's head appeared over the ridge. He came running wildly ahead of the roaring wall of water that seemed to thunder right behind him. He came plunging down the bank, his eyes horrified and huge. He was dragging 2 storks by their necks. Their wings flapped feebly. Jump, kid! Jump! Pier jumped. Lena caught one of the storks as it swung toward her. Pier crumpled into the bottom of the boat at her feet. still clutching the other stork. He lay there sobbing. "They fought me! They wouldn't come! And they were so heavy and sunk in the sand," he said over and over. Then he was suddenly angry. "Janus! It wasn't solid! I sank in it too, and the water came!" Janus was too busy to answer. He ripped his oar out of the sand and pushed the boat free. The flood tide rushed over the sandbar like a hissing, seething waterfall. But the boat was free. Behind the bank, the flood tide seized it and the boat shot ahead. Swiftly, the boat was carried forward on the tide. "I guess I didn't figure with the storm," Janus told Pier. "Those 5 days of storm must have left all kinds of sticky sea silt on that sand. But you made it, didn't you?" Lena sat with the stork in her lap. Pier crouched at her feet, and a last sob forced its way out of him. He breathed deeply. He pulled himself up on the seat next to Lena and held the other stork in his lap. He and Lena sat very still. They sat looking at the great white birds, half dead, half drowned. Only a dim flicker in the eyes showed they were still alive. Pier softly stroked the long neck of his stork. Lena hugged her stork to her as if to warm it. It was unbelievable. Storks in their laps. Great, strange birds that flew over oceans and seas and continents were lying here in their laps. Pier and Lena looked at each other, an odd, astounded look. Then they looked at the storks again, trying to believe it. They were unaware that the boat, riding rapidly out on the sweep of the tide, was nearing the dike and the tower. "Hey, hold their necks!" Janus suddenly warned. "They're still wild, even if they are pretty meek now, but with those bills they could knock holes in you two kids." Lena looked up, alarmed. Pier didn't listen, but went on stroking the long, stretched-out neck of the white bird for which he had almost given his life. It couldn't be believed. "We've got 2 storks," he mumbled queerly to Lena, as if only now was the fact beginning to dawn on him. Suddenly, Dirk, Auke, and Ilke were yelling at them from the dike. Pier and Lena looked up startled. They were back. Here was the dike, and there stood not only Dirk, Ilke, and Auke, but all the women and all the little children and Dua. Even Grandmother Sybil stood there. All of Shora was on the dike. And we'll stop now. The second half of the chapter will resume almost immediately on another video.